Hi everybody and welcome to the CPD Business Building webinar. Today we are joined by the lovely Maria Hocking and she's going to be delivering a masterclass in delivering a webinar. Remember, just letting loads of people in, so it's lovely to have you with us today. Share in the chat box with me where you've come from and who you are, so it'd be lovely to hear from you. Just pop in that chat box for me while I admit lots of lovely people. Okay. So let me introduce you to our lovely guest, Maria Hocking, aptly named the life changer by her clients. She's an inspiring coach, captivating speaker and author who's passionate about changing lives with her heart and her words. Having overcome many personal challenges through her life, she is walking, talking proof that what she shares works. Excelling in the field of personal development, she travels globally, coaching, speaking and changing lives. She's also a highly regarded mentor for new coaches and thrives on helping other professionals change the world too. We invited her back today because she did such a sterling job of bringing her book chapter, How to Win and Keep Clients, to life. So it's time for you to sit back, take notes and enjoy. So hello, Maria. Sorry, before we kick off, just remembered something. Just need to let you know the webinar is going to be an hour long and we are going to be taking questions at the end. So Maria is going to be hosting a 45-minute webinar and we'll take some questions at the end. So over to you, Maria. Welcome.
Well, welcome everybody. It's really great to be here today. So yes, like Ruby said, I'll be delivering a masterclass in delivering a webinar. And I'm really excited about sharing this stuff because I know the difference it could make to your life and your business. So yes, it's going to be a really great webinar. And the actual aim of this webinar, there we go, let me get the next slide up. The aim of this webinar is to enable you to deliver with maximum impact so that your audience acts on your knowledge. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. But the aim of this webinar is to enable you to deliver with maximum impact. So we were talking today about webinar obstacles, how to feel confident when delivering, your body language, your voice tone, and your knowledge. So that's what we'll be covering. But just before we get into that, I'd like to share a little bit about my background with you. So I've been speaking publicly to groups of people for 25 years plus. I've been working for 15 years as a life changer, incorporating coaching, mentoring, NLP and hypnotherapy. I've got 10 years experience mentoring life coaches, which I absolutely love. I've got 10 years experience teaching speakers how to present powerfully and deliver their message effectively. And I'm also author of my own books, Trip Naked with Redress with Happiness, How to Survive and Thrive Through Personal Challenge, and also co-author of How to Win and Keep Clients. So just before we start, I would like you to think about this little phrase that's going to pop up on the screen in a minute. But just for a moment, take a look at the images on the bottom of that screen. And you can see that these people are responding in slightly different ways, but they are all responding. So take a look at these words. The meaning of communication is the response that you get. And I highly recommend that you write these words down because they are so, so important. The meaning of communication is the response that you get. Now, I believe as webinar leaders, we need to take responsibility. We need to take responsibility for our communication to others so that our participants act on our knowledge. So I know that we don't know exactly what everyone will do after our webinar in great detail, but we do know that if we communicate powerfully and effectively, then we are more likely to get a good response. So I'd like you right now just to think about taking 100% full responsibility for the delivery of your communication so that you get the best possible response. And ideally, that response will be for your audience to act on your knowledge. And just before we sort of get into the real meat of this webinar, I would really like you to think about your audience. If you are delivering a webinar, I think it's really important to think about these 4 things before you even start to put content together, before you start to think about the delivery. So you need to think, why will your audience be joining your webinar? And I was thinking today, when I was putting this webinar together, maybe some of you right now have had no experience in webinars. Maybe some of you have started webinars and want to up your skills. Or maybe some of you are just really experienced and are curious about what I'm going to deliver today. So these were all the thoughts that I was having as I was putting this webinar together. And what may your audience be feeling at the start of the webinar? And I will say that time of day has to be taken into consideration. So right now in the UK, it's morning. So I'm guessing some of you are feeling fresh and bright and awake. But if you're delivering a webinar in the evening, then you need to focus on communicating powerfully and engaging your audience even more, because some people might have had a long day at work, they might be tired. You need to think about what they're feeling at the start of the webinar. Or maybe they're just feeling apprehensive or curious, like I said, but it's really important to think about your audience. And what do you want them to feel during the webinar? There's a lot of words like feel coming in here, and you'll see why as we go through the content, but you need to know what you want your audience to feel throughout. Very, very important. And what would you like them to do after the webinar? Well, after this webinar, I would like you to act on my knowledge in whichever way possible. And, you know, it depends on the content that you're delivering, but I would love you to go out there, deliver more webinars, deliver more powerfully, and change the world. That's what I would love you to do, even if it's just one person at a time. But these things you need to think about before you even start putting the content together for your webinar. Now, I guess it would be really, really easy to assume today that we would be talking about technology and content. After all, there are so many webinars out there about how to use Zoom or how to use different platforms and about the content that you should include or shouldn't include. Well, you know, I am no expert in technology. I am not the queen of technology. I put my hands up right now. It's something I have to work quite hard at to learn. And content, I know that you know your content. If you didn't know your content, you wouldn't be here listening to this right now. So we are not talking about technology and we are not talking about content. Our focus today is on vocal and physical delivery. Now, and that is for a very good reason, because what you say isn't as important as the way that you say it. And I recommend, if you've got pen and paper right now, write this down. And if you take nothing else from this webinar today, please take this. What you say isn't as important as the way that you say it. So for example, if I came onto this webinar today and I said to you, I'm going to help you deliver with maximum impact so that your audience acts on your knowledge, would you believe me? Absolutely not. But what did I say? I'm going to teach you to deliver with maximum impact so that your audience acts on your knowledge. So can you see what you say is not as important as the way that you say it? But just before we get into talking about the way that we say things, I think it's super important to talk about one potential thing that could be a massive obstacle for many. Now, this might be a massive obstacle for you right now. It might have been in the past, but it's so important to talk about. And there are 2 questions that I would like you to ponder. What stops us from creating a webinar? Or why do we create but not deliver? Now, this can happen, and having worked with coaches and business people, I know that these are real fears, and I know that they're real fears because I work with them all the time. So we need to think about, what are these obstacles that could potentially be stopping us standing in our power and delivering our knowledge? Well, there is one big reason that stops us, and that is webinar fear. And it's something that we might have all experienced at one point. You may be experiencing it now. And I know that I have definitely experienced it, and I have evidence. because on the slide in front of you here, you will see a picture of me. Now, this was when I first started doing webinars, and I remember feeling so overwhelmed, literally so overwhelmed, that I went downstairs, I left my office, and I sat in front of the TV trying to watch some just like trash TV just to distract myself and relax my mind. And I was so overwhelmed by webinar fear that I couldn't even focus on the TV. So I just pulled my jumper up over my head, and my daughter said, "Mum, what are you doing?" And I said, "Hating Zoom right now." And she thought it was absolutely hilarious because there was not a computer in sight. But I would like to, let you know that I overcame that fear. I absolutely love Zoom now. And I've learned to love it because it's so powerful and it can help us reach so many people, like so many other platforms out there. So, talking about this fear, what is it that stops us standing in our power and delivering our knowledge? What specifically? Well, I ran a poll on social media, and these are the 4 fears that came out of that. And the first was the fear of technology. The second was the fear of no one turning up, and that was a big fear for a lot of people. You may be experiencing some of these fears, by the way, or you may have experienced them in the past. The fear of judgment. What will people think of us? Will I know enough? What will they say about us? And finally, the fear of not being perfect. Another big one. Well, I'd like to help you right now because we're going to reframe some of these fears and think about them in a slightly different way to ensure that your path is completely clear so that you can go ahead and create powerful webinars. So let's talk about fear number 1, the fear of technology. It's a big fear, but you can overcome this fear. These skills can be learned. And my advice to you is not to try and work out how to use the technology 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there, because I tried that and it just doesn't work. I recommend blocking out an afternoon or morning or a day in your diary and immersing yourself fully so you can practice and repeat, because we learn through repetition. So block time out in your diary, get really good at technology and overcome that fear. Fear number 2, whoa, big one, the fear of no one turning up. Now, I don't know about you, but I have memories of being about 7 or 8 years old and, having a birthday party and worrying that no one would turn up to my birthday party. And I think it's that same fear. It's a genuine fear. What if nobody turns up for my webinar? Well, it's okay. Because if nobody turns up for your webinar and you record it, you still have content for life. You can put it out there again and again and again, and people will see your content. So ditch that fear of no one turning up and reframe it and remember that you have content for life. Fear number 3, the fear of judgment. And I know that you know what I'm talking about here. We've all experienced this at some point in our lives. And many people fear being judged while they're delivering a webinar. But what I'm going to say to you is going to flip this on its head. If you are thinking about what people might say about you or how they're going to respond to you, or if they think that you're not going to know enough or not deliver effectively, then the only person doing the judging is you. You are guilty of judging their expected behavior, and that is not fair on your participants. So let go of that fear of judgment, understand you're the only one judging, overcome that obstacle and deliver that webinar. And fear number 4, worried about perfection. Okay, what I would like you to do right now is I would like you to get a pen and paper, if you've got one, write down the word perfection right now. Write it down, get it down there on paper. And then I would like you to cross it out and replace it with the word authenticity. Because as webinar leaders, I totally believe that we need to trade perfection for authenticity. We don't need to be perfect. Yes, things go wrong occasionally. Maybe we hit the wrong button. Maybe the phone rings. This stuff happens. But if you are truly, authentically yourself, that is the most important thing that you can be. Don't worry about perfection. Rehearse, get it as good as you can, but just be authentic. You just be you. So trade perfection for authenticity always. Here we go, next slide. And why do we need to do this? Why do we need to overcome webinar fear? There's one big reason. If you don't stand in your power and deliver, people will suffer. And I want you to really think about that for a moment. If you don't overcome this fear, or if you don't communicate effectively, who are you not helping? Maybe you work in the field of business, and maybe someone's business right now is literally going down the pan, but your knowledge could help them. People are suffering if you are not standing and delivering. Maybe you're a relationship coach, or maybe you work in the field of relationships. What if there's a relationship out there right now that is about to break down and shatter a family? What if you delivering your knowledge can help that family? So people are suffering if you are not delivering. And if you don't recognize the character on the right hand side of the screen there, you might be a little bit too young, but that is Adamant, who was very famous for the Stand and Deliver song. So remember Adamant, stand and deliver. So on the right hand side of your screen now, you will see a very handsome gentleman, and I'm sure you all know who this is. And what we're going to talk about right now is the optimum state to be in before you deliver your webinar. This is so important. Now, if you've just come in the door and you've just walked the dog, you've been shopping and you kind of click the buttons or hit the button for the webinar on your computer and you're stressed, that is not the best state to be in to deliver your content. But the best state to be in prior is the power pose. Now, this comes from some really exciting research from a lady called Amy Cuddy, who is a social psychologist. I recommend you check her out on YouTube. She's also got an amazing book called Presence, and she has done an immense amount of research into the field of body language and what we communicate. So just for a moment now, I would like you to think about how we sit or stand when we're feeling anxious or not quite so confident. What do we actually do with our bodies? What do we do with our heads, our limbs, our posture? Well, the truth is we close ourselves down. We might drop our head. We bring our limbs closer to our body. We might cross our arms, but we make ourselves very, very small. So we know that the way we feel affects our body. But what Amy Cuddy discovered was that the way that we use our body also affects the way that we feel. And we can affect the way that we feel in a very positive way by using something called the power pose. Now, the power pose is anything in which a position in which we open our bodies and we expand. So it's about making ourselves bigger and taking up more space and opening the body. And if you look at Superman there on the right, you'll notice that his arms are away from his body. His hips are at least, his feet are at least hip width apart, and he's standing quite confidently. So right now, I'm going to teach you to power pose, and I would like you to all do this with me. Okay, so I'd like you to actually sit there in your seats right now and copy everything that I'm doing, and it's for a very good reason. I would like you to sit really tall right now. So I would like you to imagine there's a golden thread going from your head up to the ceiling or the sky, and it's pulling you up. So you're taking up more space vertically. I would like you to lift your chin up, just as in the picture on the screen. Put your shoulders back and relaxed. And then I would like you to take your arms away from your body. So you can either put your hands on your hips, or you can raise your arms up into the air. So just hold that position for a minute, either hands on the hips or arms in the air. Just hold it there, and then make sure that your feet are at least hip width apart. Now notice how you start to feel in this position. And what I'm going to tell you is that if you hold this position for just 2 minutes, but you can relax right now, relax. If you hold that position for just 2 minutes, you can decrease the cortisol, which is a stress hormone in your body, by up to 25% and increase your testosterone levels by about 17 to 20%. Now, isn't that absolutely incredible? So we can actually make ourselves feel more confident and feel more powerful simply by power posing for 2 minutes before the webinar. Now, many people, and I've seen this happen before delivering a webinar, they'll be on their phone checking their texts. But if you're on your mobile phone, you're shutting down that body again. You need to open and expand. So have a think right now. How do you think it would impact your delivery if you were feeling powerful and confident prior to your webinar? It would impact it in a very positive way. And their research shows that when we power pose, not only do we feel more confident and powerful, we're actually perceived by others to be more confident and powerful as well. So before you start the webinar, 2 minutes, power pose, and you will notice a difference in your communication. So let's talk about the physical and vocal delivery of your webinar. Now, I've seen lots of webinars, like I said, about webinar delivery, but there are so few webinars that contain this content. So this content is invaluable to you. Now on the screen there, you will see a bow and arrow. And I thought I would use this analogy because I think it fits what we're talking about really well here today. So if you see the body of the bow there, the big wooden structure of the bow, that is your body language. And you'll notice that that looks quite strong in the image that you see. And then the string of the bow is your voice tone. And we all know that the string is flexible, it can move around. And when our body is correct, our body language is congruent with what we're saying, and our tone is congruent with what we're saying, then we can hit the mark with our words, which in the form of the arrow on the screen. And I would like you to imagine right now that if that bow wasn't as structured, if that bow wasn't as strong, the body language, the body of that bow wasn't as strong, and if that tone wasn't as flexible, what would happen to your words? They definitely wouldn't hit the mark. That arrow would shoot off in a completely different direction or even drop to the floor. So remember the bow and arrow. And it's so important because we do make an impact when our body language is strong and congruent with the message being delivered. And our tone is congruent with the message being delivered and the words that are being spoken. So to give you an example of this, bring to mind a time that you were having a conversation with somebody. Maybe it was a friend, a family member, or maybe it was a colleague. And what they were saying seemed to be technically right. The words were correct, but you had like an uneasy feeling that what they were saying wasn't quite true or believable. That was because what they were saying didn't match what they were saying with their body. We have something called body language leakage. Even when we're communicating with words, our body is saying things and it's either congruent with our words or it's incongruent. And we can, as human beings, can pick up on that incongruence, whether we're face-to-face or whether we're delivering a webinar. So what we're aiming for is total congruence between everything that we're saying. And why is body language so important? Because the way that we use our body when presenting, especially on a webinar, will have a direct impact on the way that our messages are delivered. Because people are more likely to believe non-verbal communication over verbal. Interesting, hey? People are more likely to remember or believe non-verbal communication over verbal. So on the screen here, we have something called the communication model. And this is a very general example to give you a really rough idea of how important our body is. And you'll find some different statistics on the internet, you'll find some different percentages, but I think this is just a really great base place to start at to help you understand why your body is so important and why your tone is so important. Now on the screen there, this pie chart represents our communication, and we communicate through our words, through our voice tone, and through our body language. Now, the red represents the communication through our body language. 55% of our communication comes through what we're actually physically doing. 38% comes through our voice tone. and only 7% comes from the actual words themselves. So rewind a little bit and remember what I said at the beginning. What you say isn't as important as the way that you say it. So I'm really hoping this is making sense to you right now, and it's going in, and you're really getting the underlying message here. But your task right now is to freeze, literally freeze. If you're still in a power pose, well done, you may be enjoying that. But what I would like you to do is to freeze in whichever position you're sat or if you're stood, and look at your body. Look at your feet, your knees, your legs. Maybe you're leaning forwards and hopefully you're not asleep on the desk. Maybe you're tilted to one side. Maybe your arms are folded. Maybe your head's in your hands. What could you potentially be communicating right now with your body that you may not have been aware of previous this conversation? And you can relax again now, but what I would like you to do is just to be aware that you are communicating every single second with every single part of your body, whether you realize it or not. And as webinar leaders, we need to know about this stuff. We need to be aware of our body language and our communication. So how can we use our body to make an impact, to present powerfully? Well, the first thing is to ensure eye contact and look at the camera. Now, this might seem really, really obvious, but this is a skill that I teach over and over again because it's something that most people fail to do when they first start delivering webinars. Now, it's really common just to look at the screen. And yes, I have been looking at the screen throughout this webinar, but I'm also ensuring my eyes are returning regularly to the camera. So I'm ensuring that I'm connecting with you and making eye contact on a regular basis. And if you look at your audience, they are more likely to believe what you're saying and they're more likely to trust you. And you're more likely to build better rapport. So ensure that you are looking at that camera on a regular basis. And your palms should always be open. Now, on a webinar, the audience may not always see your hands. I understand that, but there will be occasions when they do. And I recommend that you use your hands as part of the communication occasionally. But if your palms are closed, it's going to be as if you're hiding something from your audience, or you're showing that you're not confident or a little bit anxious. It's going to dilute your message. And we want to avoid diluting our messages. I was on a webinar last week, and the webinar leader was twiddling their wedding ring as they were speaking, which was communicating to me that they were a little bit anxious or a little bit stressed, and it diluted their message. So don't twiddle with your rings, don't clasp your hands, and keep palms on show as often as possible. Sit tall. Like I say, you want to appear confident. You want to be confident in your message. And if you sit tall, that will help. And uncross your arms. Now, I have seen people sat there with their arms crossed delivering webinars. The problem is when we cross our arms, we have a barrier between us and the audience. If I cross my arms, I'm putting a barrier between me and you. And I don't want a barrier because I want to communicate effectively. I want to keep this channel for communication completely open. Now, when we're delivering webinars, there's almost a slight barrier there already because we've got a screen in front of us. So what we need to do is ensure that there are no barriers. So keep those arms uncrossed. And keep your legs uncrossed. And you might think, why on earth is she talking about keeping your legs uncrossed? Well, just try this for me, just for 1 minute. What I'd like you to do right now is cross your legs. If they're not already crossed, cross your legs. And then I want you to cross your arms. Okay. Now I want you to leave your legs crossed and uncross your arms. What you will find that it's more of a natural position for us to be in. If we've got our legs crossed, then we are more likely to cross our arms because it feels more comfortable. If we keep those legs uncrossed, we're more likely to remember to keep the arms uncrossed and keep open. Now, what I recommend you do is to put a football or a small box between your ankles when first starting out, because this will really help remind you to keep that whole body language open. It really works very, very well. and smile. Your audience have given up their time to be with you today, and I super appreciate you being here and giving up time in your daily schedule to sit and listen with me. So be friendly, smile, warm people's hearts. You'll build much better rapport and your communication will be delivered more effectively again. So let's talk about voice tone. And remember that voice tone accounts for approximately 38% of our communication. And if you look at the screen, you'll see we've got that bow there. And remember, that tone, the string, represents your voice tone. It's flexible. Now, the best explanation I've ever heard of voice tone is the musical notes that we hear within communication external to the words themselves. So if we just park up the words here for a minute and we take apart the voice tone and we work on the voice tone and we put it back together with the words, then boom, we have immense power. Never underestimate the power of your voice tone. And there are lots of things that contribute to our overall voice tone, but the four main things are as follows. Pacing, how fast or how slow you speak. Volume, when you're raising your voice, you can also lower your voice. Emphasis, the emphasis you place on particular words, and the pauses that you may leave between words or sentences. But just for a minute, I would like you to think about how you would describe your own voice tone. And this is something we've failed to think about. And actually, it's quite hard to identify. So if you're unable to identify your own voice tone, I'd recommend asking some friends or some family what they think your voice tone is like, because it may not be what you expect. We need to know how we speak normally so that we can deliver effectively during a webinar. So some people might have a very monotone voice where they kind of speak the same level the whole way along, or other people might have quite a sing-songy voice that goes up and down. But you need to identify your own voice tone in order to work on it to be effective. And here we go. Remember those questions that I talked about at the beginning? What you want your audience to feel? Now you'll begin to see the importance of those things. Do you want your audience to feel excited or motivated? Do you want them to feel pain? And you might wonder, why would I want my audience to feel pain? Whether you realize it or not, earlier on in this webinar, I wanted you to feel a little bit of pain. When I said to you, if you don't stand and deliver, people will suffer. I wanted you to feel a little bit of pain to make you realize that if you're not delivering webinars, people are suffering. I was using pain as a motivator, and you can do the same with your voice tone. Or maybe you want your audience to feel determined or powerful or inspired. All these things are possible with the use of your voice tone in conjunction with your body language. So the easiest way to kind of describe this is to imagine that you're taking your audience on a journey. And this isn't just a flat journey. We're talking of highs and lows and an emotional journey. You want them to feel things, because when your audience feel, they are more likely to remember what you are teaching them. So the aim of you as a webinar leader is to take them on a journey where they experience many different emotions. But the first tip, I guess, with voice tone, it is really big actually, because the rest of it is completely irrelevant if you don't get this bit right. You need to ensure that you're straight and sitting up. Now, there's a reason for this. On the left-hand side there, you will see an image of the voice box. The voice box is highlighted in red there. And below the voice box, you'll see the trachea, or the windpipe. Now, I would like you to imagine that trachea is like a straw. And if you're slouched over like this, that straw is bent and you can't get the air through it as it should be flowing. Now, in order for us to speak, the air needs to pass over our vocal cords. But if there's not enough air, then we're not able to create the tone that we desire. And similarly, if you look at the picture on the right, you'll see the lungs and the diaphragm. if we are slouched over and we're not sitting up, then that diaphragm is compromised and so are the lungs. The diaphragm's job is to pull down as the lungs inflate. If you're sitting like this, the diaphragm is a bit scrunched up and it can't pull down effectively, and therefore you won't get all of the air in your lungs that you actually need. So voice tone will be a lot harder to work with. So make sure you're sitting straight. And you need to vary the pace of your speech. Now, the easiest way to think about this is that you are the driver and your participants are your passengers. Now, if you had your foot on the accelerator the whole time through the webinar and you were talking super, super fast, then you're going to get to the end of your webinar and your audience is going to go, what on earth was that about? They didn't take anything in. But if you are too slow all of the time and your webinar is a bit tedious, your passengers are going to get out and they're going to walk. You are going to lose them completely. So my top tip is to vary the pace of your speech. So you can slow your voice down if you want to make people, if you want to teach people something really important, or if you want to evoke curiosity or sadness, or simply if you want to get them thinking about this new idea, slow your voice down. And on the other hand, if you want them to feel excited or joy or a sense of urgency, you can do this now, or your passion, then you can speed up that voice. But ideally, you would like to think about your whole journey on the webinar as speeding up and slowing down. Remember the up and the down, taking your audience on this journey, and you can do that with your pace. Now, you might not know what your pace is. Now, I am an exceptionally fast speaker. My pace is about 222 words per minute, which is very fast. And I can probably top that on a good day. I wonder if you know what your pace is. So what I recommend doing is recording yourself talking as you would normally for 1 minute, and then simply count the words to find out if you speak slowly or fast. Now, a great way to use this is Microsoft Word. There's a dictate button on there. Just speak for 1 minute, time yourself, dictate for a minute, and then Microsoft Word counts the words for you. You've got the answer at the bottom of the screen. And just to give you a rough idea, a slow pace is less than 110 words per minute. General conversation is about 120 to 150. Fast is more than 160. Radio hosts tend to speak at 150 or 160, and auctioneers are 250 to 400. So you can see the big range we've got there. You can see how differently we all may be speaking. But you need to make sure that you are varying your pace during your webinar. And you need to do that. You need to know what your normal pace is. So I highly recommend working out your words per minute count. And now voice tone with regards to emphasis. Now, this is so, so important. And I'm going to show you the importance because I am going right now to read out a sentence 6 times. And I'm going to emphasize a different word every time. And you'll see that the word that I'm emphasizing is highlighted. I never said he stole the car. 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 So can you see we have got one sentence, but 6 different interpretations based on the emphasis that I have put on particular words. So really think about the words that you're emphasizing. And a great way to pick this out is to record yourself running your webinar before you've actually even run it. And you will very quickly see the words you need to emphasize more. But it becomes very, very obvious when you have recorded yourself. So I highly recommend doing that. And your volume, you need to think about your volume. You can increase your volume and you can decrease your volume. And this will make your audience feel different things and cause them to react in different ways. So if you want to make an important point, If you want to say you can deliver these webinars and you are truly capable of doing so, you can raise your volume. Or you can use that to reactivate your audience. So look at your audience on the cameras there. And if you can see they're getting a little bit bored, then raise the volume, reactivate them. But then you can bring it down. If you want to capture their attention and have them hanging off every single word. So play about with the volume as if it's on a sliding scale. Remember that up and down, another thing that you can use to communicate effectively and make an impact. And I guess my biggest top tip with voice tone is to tell a story. And I'm wondering right now if you have a story that you can tell. Now, in a moment, I'm about to share a part of my own personal story with you for a couple of reasons, which will become apparent. The first is because I want you to just notice when I'm speeding up, when I'm slowing down, when I'm emphasizing. And I want you to notice how you feel as I speak. And then as I progress, I think you'll probably start to notice something else as well. So on the screen, right in front of you right now, you will see two images. Now on the right-hand side there is me on the right with a couple of colleagues of mine, and we were running an inspirational evening, and you can see the audience sat there. And I'm feeling very confident, I'm very happy, and very pleased to be doing that job on that night. And on the left-hand side, you'll see an image of somebody with their head in their hands, and you can only imagine how they're feeling. But that image on the left was me 24 years ago. I went through a particularly difficult time, and I guess I was quite young. I had a 3-year-old daughter, and I just had my baby son. And life was pretty good, and I didn't really question happiness or question what I wanted to do with my life, but things were just pretty good. And then it changed, because I started to lose all of the hair on my head, and it came out in clumps, day after day after day. I was absolutely horrified. And the worst part for me was getting in the shower in the morning, and I would watch what should have been part of me slither down my body and disappear down the plug hole. And with every clump of hair that disappeared, I honestly felt that I was losing part of me too. Until just a few weeks later, I found myself completely bald, and I was at rock bottom. I thought I didn't deserve to be on this planet. I felt ugly. I felt like an outcast. I tried pushing my husband away, because how could he possibly love me if I had no love at all for myself? I was repulsive in my own mind. And this went on for quite some time. I stopped going out, and I locked myself indoors because people would treat me differently because I looked different, which only reinforced my belief that I wasn't enough. But then one day it changed, and it changed just like that. Now, I remember having a particularly bad morning, and I'd been crying all morning. And then suddenly I heard this chuckle. And I looked across, and I saw my 3-year-old daughter, and she was playing with my son in the baby bouncer. And she was flicking the back of the bouncer, and he was like roaring with delight and chuckling, that deep baby chuckle. And in that moment, it felt as if a light filled me from the top of my head to the tips of my toes. And in that moment, I knew that I'd been so busy focusing on what I'd lost that I'd forgotten what I had. And that was when my life began to change. So fast forward slightly, I knew in that moment that I needed to change my focus. And my focus was to train as a fitness instructor, which I did. And I started wearing a wig. I used my wig as my branding tool. I approached papers, the media, radio. I got so much free publicity, and I built my business on my wig, and business absolutely boomed. But little did I know that I was building up all this knowledge that I would one day deliver to others. And then a couple of years later, chronic fatigue syndrome came to play, which wiped me out again for a year, but I picked myself up again, gaining more and more knowledge. In my mid-30s, I found myself in A&E at midnight one night, being diagnosed with hip dysplasia. And they said, Mrs. Hocking, you are going to need a major operation, and you're going to be out of work for quite some time. So a year in a wheelchair, a year on crutches. But again, building more resilience, building more confidence, learning how to be truly happy through adversity. And by this point, I'm starting to realize, and you may have had this feeling, that I had a lot of knowledge inside me that I needed to spill out onto others. And I'm sure you know what that feels like. And I think the biggest gift of all was 5 years ago when my husband was diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder. He began to lose his sight overnight, and it happened very, very quickly. He is having treatment now, and his sight has been partially restored, but his condition is progressive. But when it first happened, I cannot even begin to tell you how terrifying it was for him and for us as a family. There was one particular night that he stood out on the decking and he had tears pouring down his face because the stars were beginning to disappear. And the next day, we were stood on the side of the football pitch, and it still fills me with emotion today. And he said, "I can't see which one is our son anymore." Now, can you just imagine going through all that? But the reason I'm not telling you this because I want sympathy or I want to impress you. Why I'm telling you this is because during that time, we learned how to live more than ever. We knew that we needed to live for today and live more. And that included sharing my knowledge even more. And that was when I wrote my first book, Strip Naked and Redress with Happiness. And I know that you know that feeling, like I say, when you've got knowledge bursting out of you and you have to share it. And so that took me into the world of book writing and webinars, because we can reach people all over the world and we can change people's lives just by using our fingertips and a keyboard. And I just think that's truly incredible. And the reason that I share my story is because I want you to think about the knowledge that you have inside you. What challenges have you experienced? What did you learn from these challenges? What were your own strategies for overcoming these challenges? And who, just who, may benefit from your knowledge? And how can you reach these people now? And how could this improve or even change their life? And what I'm hoping to do with this conversation is to open your mind. You may have an idea for one webinar, you may be delivering one type of content, but what other content do you have inside here that you could spill out onto others to help change the world person by person, bit by bit? And your challenges might have been through business, they might have been personal challenges. It really doesn't matter. But what I would like to draw your attention to is that you have a huge wealth of knowledge inside you right now. And I would like to ensure that you are maximizing that knowledge, combining that with your body language and your voice tone to deliver powerfully, to make an impact so that your audience acts on your knowledge. And my biggest top tips are: never underestimate the value of what you know, and never underestimate the difference that you as an individual can make. I would like you to imagine that every webinar you deliver is like dropping a pebble into a pond. The ripples will spread far and wide. You might change somebody's life, which will then impact their family member's life and their friend's life. And that could go on for years to come. But you need to drop the pebble. And I found this really great quote, which I think sums up this whole webinar. When people act on your message, they begin to change. They don't just change their behavior, they change their identity. They begin to become someone new because of your message. Very, very powerful indeed. And finally, we've talked about body language, we've talked about voice tone, we've talked about obstacles, we've talked about your knowledge. And now I would like to remind you that you should make the end of your webinar the beginning of a relationship. And I would love to hear from you after this webinar. You can see my web address on the bottom there, which is mariahocking.com. And the first 5 people to connect with me will receive a copy of my book, Strip Naked and Redress with Happiness. And also I have 2 copies of How to Win and Keep Clients as well. So please email me, let me know which book you would like, and please connect with me and tell me what this webinar meant to you. And I would love to hear the actions that you are going to take as a result. So thank you very much.
Thank
so
you.
Back over to Ruby, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. I was just trying to press the buttons, they wouldn't release. So thank you for a really inspirational webinar. I loved the bit about adamant because I am that age. And I thought the pacing was really interesting because all of these tips you could use for podcasting as well. It's not just for webinars. So
Absolutely.
I think it translates into the podcasting world as well. So questions. Has anyone got any questions that they'd like to ask? If you'd like to pop them into the chat box, I will share a couple just to get us all started. So if you just want to pop your messages, your questions in there for us. So Maria, we talked about techie issues, and as you said, that's one of the big things that comes up as an issue for people. What would you suggest to people if it does start going wrong and the technology is going wonky? What tips would you give to people?
I think it's actually, what's the worst thing? I think you need to keep this in your mind. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? Say if the Wi-Fi cuts off, and okay, we don't want the Wi-Fi to cut off, and so I think actually it's just realizing that nothing bad will happen if it all goes wrong, and I think it's about being honest with people, and if you can get back online, obviously, but I think it's the thought of it going wrong that is the problem. And I think just that message inside you, if it goes wrong, nothing's going to happen, nobody's going to die, it's going to be okay, and maybe just get out there and research a bit more to find out what you could do next time to lessen the chances of it going wrong, if that makes sense. But there are some things that we cannot control, and sometimes that is the Wi-Fi, or sometimes technology does fail us, if that makes sense. So I guess we need to focus on the things that we can control in the moment, and not what we can control, and just do our best to learn from mistakes, or make sure that these things don't happen next time if we have any control over that.
Brilliant. Just someone just said they know your story, read your book, still made you cry. I think a lot of what you reminded us about is relevant to how we talk in our coaching calls too. Yes, so inspiring, Maria, and what a journey you've been on. So anyone else got any questions? If not, I could throw another one in there for you. What would you tell people if because this is one that comes up a lot with my clients as well, and I've got my own version of this, but what would you tell people if they get asked a question, they don't know how to answer it?
Yeah,
and it's on the call, and I don't know how to answer this question, what am I going to do?
Yeah. We cannot know absolutely everything, can we? We obviously know a lot about the content we're talking about, but there's no possible way that we could know absolutely everything. And I think rather than trying to wing it in that situation, avoid winging it, avoid making something up. Just be really honest with people and say, I actually don't know the answer to that question right now, but I will find out, and we'll connect after this webinar, and I will find out and get back to you by the end of today. So what you do is promise to answer that question, admit that you can't answer it right now, and know that it's okay not to know everything. I think that's probably the key tip that I would give people.
Brilliant. Thank you. Exactly what I'd share too.
Yeah.
So another question, how long do you think we need to take time-wise to prepare? It used to be an hour for every minute we're due to speak. Has that changed?
I think it really depends on the intensity of your practice as well. I mean, I do rehearse a lot for webinars. I rehearse the content, I rehearse the delivery over and over again. And I'm just trying to think now, if I have probably rehearsed this webinar, I would say at least 20 times, and that's not an exaggeration, 20 times. So I think it depends on how happy you are with your own delivery. And I think because you might practice it 5 times and get it really, really good if you've got a lot of experience. But I just like to practice it over and over again. So it's almost like I could run this webinar with my eyes closed with no slides because I know the content so well. And I think it depends if you record yourself. I always record myself running the webinar before I actually record it, before I actually go live, if that makes sense. And I think so I think I'm answering the question here, but if I record myself, I can see much more quickly where I need to improve. Does that make sense? So I can make those changes far quicker. So then I have to rehearse for less time or prepare for less time. And so that's to do with, I guess, vocal delivery. But with regards to the actual content as well itself, I think I think the content comes to me personally quite easily. And I think it might come to a lot of people if you're really passionate about what you're speaking about. So the content doesn't actually take me very long to put together. So I never put a time on it. But what I do is sit with the content and just make sure that I'm happy with the content. And yes, I make tweaks as I'm going along, or I'll get new ideas of something coming in. But I never ever time myself rehearsing, if that makes sense, as in how many hours I've spent rehearsing it or putting into it or preparing it. Never ever do that. I think it gets to the point where I just keep doing it until I am 100% happy with my delivery.
Brilliant. Thank you. So we've got time just for a couple more questions. So
Yeah.
Dora, thank you. Hit the head of the nail. I can sense that the knowledge inside me can be valuable for others. I only get discouraged by the meager response to webinar invitations. I wonder if that's because there are way too many webinar offers or because I fail to give a preliminary taste of what people can get. What's your advice?
Yeah, I think for the engagement for webinars, I think it's not just about the webinar, it's about the content that you're putting out prior to the webinar. So I think it's about building an audience and keeping an audience throughout your whole career, if that makes sense. So if you don't put anything on social media, for example, and then just bang out a webinar or advertise a webinar, one thing in 6 months, then you're not going to get that engagement. I think it's about building the trusted relationships with the people that are interested in what you're doing. So I know that I can put something out on social media and get a lot of engagement because I've spent a lot of years building relationships with people, if that makes sense. So what I would say is, yes, focus on getting people onto the webinar, but also focus on what you're doing around that when you're not running the webinar. Because I honestly think that is the key. It's the whole phrase, your network is your net worth. And I think it's about focusing on building those sustainable relationships so that when you do put something out there, you're going to get a lot more engagement. And I've worked with people who had exactly this problem, actually. They suddenly decide they want to run new webinars and they start putting stuff out there, but they've got such a minimal presence on social media, for example, that they just don't get the engagement. So they're not going to get the people along. So I think my biggest tip has to be, don't just focus on filling the webinar, focus on your relationship with people outside of the webinar too.
Brilliant. And time for just one last question, because I do want to give us a 60-second CPD moment. So how do you go about asking for feedback after a webinar? That question comes from Jay.
Yeah, well, obviously, this webinar right now, I mean, you can actually literally ask for feedback after a webinar. You can literally, you can set what I've done in the past. I've sent out forms sometimes to emails. I have actually asked for feedback at the end of the webinar. And I'm quite lucky in that I've got a lot of people in my life that give me really honest feedback that are quite often on my webinars. So I would recommend asking for feedback in any way, shape or form that you can. And, I'm very happy if anybody here wants to give me feedback after this webinar, because I think we can always improve. We can always get better at what we're doing. And with regards to feedback, I just think I'd better say, it's great to get good feedback, isn't it? Absolutely. But I'm also really interested in getting the constructive feedback, because the good feedback is kind of like a bit of a ceiling. Yeah, you're there and that's really good. But what I want to do is take it up there. So I'm always interested in hearing sort of people's comments about how it could be better. So there are many ways that you could get feedback. You invite people to connect with you, and maybe you could do that. And do you remember I said at the end of your webinar, make it the beginning of a relationship? So maybe that's how you could start that relationship. Please connect with me via my email and give me some feedback. Let me know what you thought of the webinar, what you liked, what you think could be better. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And I think the more feedback you can get, the better.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Maria. So for those of you who are still here, I want you to take a note or spend 60 seconds just thinking about your CPD learning. So the feedback leads so nicely into the CPD. So why do we do this now? We do it now because we know what it's like. You go away and you'll get involved in other things about your day, and then you will forget to take this time. So we just want you to put some key learnings in the chat box and or on your CPD log. And if you don't have one of those, if you just want to reply to one of the emails that we send out to you, just asking us for CPD log, we can get that sent over to you. So just share in the comments box what your key learnings are. We'll spend this 60 seconds just doing some CPD, and I'll pop a little timer on for us as well. So Andrew, CPD log, if you just send an email to the IAPC&M, and it's a great way just to track your learning. So CPD can be anything like watching webinars as today. It can be reading books, different courses and things that you've been on. So there's lots of different ways that you can record your CPD. So definitely something you'll need that to keep your accreditation. So you need to set a number of hours. So if you haven't used one before, it's a great way to keep that learning going as you build. Okay, so that's the end of today. Hopefully you've logged some nice CPD learnings, got some great ones in practice, 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 recording it and using voice as a tool to engage. So thank you everyone for your interest today. Thank you, Maria, for a very inspirational webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.
Thank you.